Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In New York City, in a sumptuous villa perched high above Central Park, Evelyn Harper, an eccentric billionaire with a passion for luxury, was hosting a private party. The hand-picked guests wore glittering outfits and expected a classic social spectacle: champagne, forced laughter, and superficial conversation. But Evelyn had decided to spice up the evening. With a mischievous smile and a twinkle in her eye, she walked over to the grand piano in the center of the living room and declared, in a clear, determined voice, "If you play the piano, I'll marry you." A shocked silence ensued. The guests exchanged incredulous glances, some bursting into laughter, others raising an eyebrow in astonishment. Evelyn, amused, wasn't intimidated. She loved seeing people's reactions and testing their limits. In the shadows of the living room, behind the heavy curtains, stood Michael Thompson, the villa's cleaner for the past 5 years. No one ever noticed him, and that was exactly as he wanted it, until tonight. An unexpected impulse drove him to the piano, ready to take on a challenge that would change his life forever. That evening, in that luxurious room, none of the guests suspected that the simple playing of a piano would upset their certainties and reveal a talent that no one had seen coming. Michael Thompson, 32, walked silently through the sumptuous corridors of Harper's mansion. For the past 5 years, he had been the house's designated cleaner, observing everything from the shadows, invisible to the wealthy guests. His days were punctuated by mopping, vacuuming, and the meticulous care of the marble floors, but tonight, something unusual hung in the air. He had heard Evelyn Harper announce her challenge: "If you play the piano, I'll marry you." The guests had burst into laughter, some openly mocking what they considered a ridiculous eccentricity. Michael, however, felt a strange tension. This promise was not a mere joke, but an unexpected launch pad for a talent he had hidden all his life. Since childhood, the piano had been his passion. His mother, a modest musician, had taught him to play before he could even read notes properly. But life had forced him to put this dream aside. He had to work to survive and support his family. Tonight, however, fate seemed to be reaching out to him. Michael stood aside, surveying the room. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the guests, champagne glasses glistened in their elegant hands, and mocking laughter filled the living room. He took a deep breath, feeling his heart beat faster. He knew this moment could change everything. As Evelyn looked for someone to take on the challenge, she fixed her eyes on Michael, motionless in the shadows. With a mischievous smile and a wave of her hand, she declared, "And you over there, why don't you show off what you can do?" All eyes turned to him. The guests burst out laughing, some murmuring, "He must be crazy." Or, "The cleaner. Really?" But Michael, despite his stage fright, felt a newfound confidence wash over him. He walked toward the piano, his steps silent but determined, ready to reveal a talent no one would have imagined. Silence fell in the room. Michael placed his hands on the keys. The outside world disappeared. All that mattered now was the music. The entire living room held its breath. Michael sat on the piano bench, his hands trembling slightly, but his gaze fixed on the keys like an invisible conductor guiding his destiny. Evelyn Harper, standing a few feet away, crossed her arms, curious and amused, while the guests watched skeptically. Michael took a deep breath and brushed his fingertips over the keys. The first note rose, pure and clear. A heavy silence fell over the room, replaced by immediate fascination. The laughter and whispers ceased. Even Evelyn, accustomed to being the center of attention, froze in amazement. He began with a classical piece, a Chopin prelude. Each note seemed to tell a story of life, struggle, and perseverance. The guests, who had expected a ridiculous spectacle, were now captivated, their eyes wide and mouths half open. Admiring murmurs arose. "Unbelievable, how can he play like that?" Michael closed his eyes for a moment, letting his memory and emotions guide his fingers. Then, almost instinctively, he improvised. The melody became freer, bolder. His hands danced across the keys with a fluidity and emotion that mesmerized everyone present. The chords echoed through the living room, touching the hearts of even the most cynical of the guests. Evelyn felt her own breath catch. She had never imagined that a simple cleaner could reveal such talent. Pride and surprise mingled in her eyes. What she had considered a whim was becoming an unforgettable moment. When Michael finished the piece, a respectful silence fell for a few seconds before the spontaneous and enthusiastic applause erupted. The stunned guests looked at each other, unable to contain their admiration. Evelyn walked towards him, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "I think I found you." Michael opened his eyes, surprised by this statement, but his heart was beating with renewed vigor. This simple moment at the piano had changed his life, and he felt it was only the beginning. The living room still vibrated with Michael's last notes. The guests, frozen, no longer dared to speak or move. Some had trembling hands, others were breathless. No one expected such virtuosity from a man who had been invisible to them for years. Evelyn, still standing by the piano, couldn't take her eyes off Michael. She had thought it was just a game, a billionaire's whim to amuse his guests, but she had just been confronted with something much bigger. Her eyes shone with a mixture of surprise, pride, and admiration. "This is incredible," one of the guests murmured, unable to contain his astonishment. Michael, concentrating, paid no attention to the whispers. His fingers continued to caress the keys with an almost supernatural fluidity. He continued with an improvised jazz piece, fusing classical and modern styles. Each note seemed to tell a fragment of his life, his stifled dreams and his long-ignored passion. The guests gradually realized that what they had thought was a simple domestic job was actually a complete artist. The most skeptical hung their heads, ashamed of their hasty judgments. Some murmured among themselves, "How could we have overlooked this?" Evelyn stepped forward, captivated. For the first time, she saw Michael not as a mere employee, but as someone capable of transforming an entire room with his music. The billionaire felt her heart beat faster, not only from the emotion of the music, but also from the strength of character that emanated from this unassuming man. At the end of the song, Michael looked up. Evelyn's gaze met his, and a complicit silence fell. Applause erupted again, this time louder, warmer. Some guests even stood to applaud, recognizing the grandeur of the moment. Evelyn, smiling but with a mischievous twinkle, whispered almost to herself, "I have never seen anyone who could surprise me so much." Michael felt an inner warmth he had never felt before. This was no longer just a performance, it was recognition, respect, and perhaps, an unexpected beginning to his life. After the final chords, the living room still echoed with applause and murmurs of wonder. Michael slowly rose from the piano, his breath short but his face serene. The guests, who had ignored him for years, now looked at him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Evelyn Harper walked towards him, her heels clicking softly on the marble. She stopped right in front of Michael, her eyes shining with newfound curiosity. "You know, I thought this was a game, a billionaire's whim to amuse my guests," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But you just proved me wrong." Michael gave a small, humble, and discreet smile. "I never set out to impress anyone, Miss Harper," he replied, his voice calm. "Music, it's just me." The guests whispered among themselves, unable to take their eyes off him. Some murmured, "It's incredible, how could he hide such talent?" Others felt almost ashamed to have judged this man for so long on his role as a mere cleaner. Evelyn, fascinated, gestured toward the piano. "I'd like you to play again, but this time, choose what you want. Show us how you really feel." Michael took a deep breath and returned to the piano. He began to play a gentle, emotional melody, blending classical and modern improvisations. Each note seemed to tell the story of his life, the trials, the sacrifices, the silent hopes. The guests, fascinated, forgot their drinks and their conversations. All that mattered was the music. When Michael finished, an emotional silence filled the room. Then Evelyn stepped forward again and whispered almost to herself, "I think I've found the man I've been looking for." A thrill ran through Michael. For the first time, he felt his life was about to change. This was no longer simply a performance or a challenge, it was recognition, genuine respect, and perhaps the beginning of an unexpected romance between him and the billionaire. The guests, for their part, were torn between admiration and surprise. What they had thought would be a frivolous evening had just become an unforgettable moment. Michael Thompson, the invisible man of the Harper Villa, had just captivated the hearts and minds of everyone, and no one would ever forget this evening. Michael's music still resonated in the minds of the audience as the guests, still in shock, gathered in small circles to share their impressions. Some murmured in admiration, "I've never seen anyone play like that." Or, "How could we have ignored this man all these years?" Others, more proud or skeptical, forced themselves to smile, as if to hide their embarrassment. The mockery and judgment that had punctuated the evening had vanished, replaced by undeniable respect. Even the most cynical, accustomed to the social events of high society, were captivated by Michael's virtuosity. Evelyn watched the scene with a mixture of amusement and pride. She had always loved to surprise her guests, but this time, it was she who had been surprised. She realized that by provoking Michael, she had revealed a talent no one had ever dared to acknowledge. For the first time, she saw someone whose value went beyond appearances and social status. She approached Michael again, this time with a twinkle of admiration in her eyes. "You see," she whispered, almost to herself, "I wasn't just looking for a musician. I was looking for someone who could surprise me, who could touch the hearts of those who listened to him. And you did it." Michael, humble, bowed his head slightly. "I never tried to impress anyone, Mrs. Harper. I simply act, because it's my way of speaking to the world." Evelyn smiled. "And you speak very well, much better than I would have imagined." The guests, sensing the budding complicity between them, stopped their murmurs and moved closer, curious and intrigued. They wanted to understand what had just happened, this mixture of hidden talent and unexpected charisma that had transformed a simple evening into an unforgettable moment. For Michael, it was a mixture of relief and nervousness. He knew that recognition was finally coming, but he also understood that his life would never be the same again. Evelyn Harper, through a simple challenge, had just revealed to the world a man who had been invisible until then, but whose talent could no longer be ignored. The general murmur gradually turned into a chorus of applause and encouragement, confirming that Michael had just won the hearts of the room. And in a corner, Evelyn smiled mischievously. Her promise remained on the table, but now she knew she had before her someone extraordinary. The living room was still buzzing. The guests, still stunned, exchanged glances filled with respect and admiration. Michael, for his part, felt an emotion he had never known before. He was no longer just the invisible cleaner, but the man who had captivated an entire room with his music. Evelyn walked toward him, her heels clicking softly on the marble. She stood there, imposing and fascinating, but for the first time, she didn't seem intimidating or distant. Her smile was genuine, and her eyes shone with curiosity and admiration. "Michael," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I think I found you." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. He hadn't expected his words to be followed by a statement, especially not from Evelyn Harper, the eccentric and ruthless billionaire. "What you just did," she continued, "wasn't just playing the piano. It was showing your soul, your courage, your passion." She paused, staring straight into his eyes. "If you accept, I want you to be more than just a guest in my life. I want you to be part of my world." A heavy silence fell. The guests held their breath, fascinated by the scene unfolding before them. None of them would have imagined that a challenge issued to entertain the audience would turn into an almost intimate and personal declaration. Michael lowered his eyes slightly, touched by Evelyn's sincerity. He knew this moment could change his life forever. He began, but Evelyn beat him to it, placing a light hand on his shoulder. "Don't say anything for now," she whispered. "Just let me show you that I believe in you." The guests, for their part, were stunned. Michael's mystery and charm, combined with Evelyn's spontaneity and frankness, had created a scene worthy of a movie. For Michael, it was more than recognition, it was validation of all the years he spent working in the shadows, hiding his talent, dreaming of a moment when someone would see his true worth. Evelyn had just given him that moment. And while the piano still resonated softly in the living room, a new chapter in their lives, unexpected and promising, began to be written. After Evelyn's declaration, an unexpected calm fell over the living room. The guests, though still fascinated, were now attentive to Michael's every move. He sat down at the piano again, not to play, but to explain, in his own silent way, what music meant to him. "I never sought recognition," Michael began softly, his voice slightly shaky but assured. "When I was a child, my mother taught me the piano. It was our world, our refuge. But life forced me to keep this talent a secret." The guests, surprised to hear her speak like this, drew closer, captivated by her story. Evelyn, touched, felt her heart clench. She had never met someone who carried so much passion and courage in their simplest gestures. Michael continued, "For years I've worked here in the shadows, but music has always been my way of expressing myself. Tonight, when you challenged me, I saw a chance to show who I really am." A murmur rippled through the room. The guests, who had underestimated him all evening, lowered their eyes, realizing they had been judging a man by his status, not his talent. The mockery turned to genuine admiration. Evelyn, moved, placed a hand on his arm and said, "Michael, I don't think you realize how much you've just touched everyone here. What you've done is not just a musical feat. It's a lesson in humility and greatness." Michael smiled shyly but proudly. He had finally found someone who saw beyond his role as a cleaner, someone who understood the value of his passion and determination. The guests, for their part, could not help but murmur in low voices, "Incredible, what a lesson." And we laughed at him. Some felt ashamed, others inspired, but all now understood that true greatness is not measured by wealth or status, but by talent, perseverance and courage. Evelyn, with a mischievous, admiring smile, whispered almost to herself, who would have thought that a simple challenge would reveal such a treasure. That night, Michael Thompson was never the same invisible man at Harper's Villa again. He had just become the one everyone would respect, and Evelyn had just found the man capable of transforming her life and her world forever. Applause and murmurs of admiration still echoed through the living room when Evelyn stepped back slightly from the piano. Her gaze never left Michael. She had made a decision. This was no longer just a challenge or a social gathering, it was the beginning of something much bigger. "Michael," she said in a firm but gentle voice, "what you did tonight is beyond anything I could have imagined. But I don't want your talent to remain hidden here, within these walls." Michael looked at her, intrigued. He wasn't sure he understood what she meant. "I want the whole world to see what I just saw," Evelyn continued. "And I want to help you show it. I want to invest in your music career, open doors you never imagined you could walk through on your own." A mixture of surprise and doubt ran through Michael. He had spent his life dreaming in secret, practicing in the shadows, and now an eccentric billionaire was suddenly offering him a unique opportunity. "But I don't know if I can," he began, hesitant, his voice trembling. Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Michael, I'm not asking you to choose right now. I just want you to know that I believe in you. What you've shown tonight, it's more than talent. It's proof that you're capable of great things. And I want to accompany you on this journey." The guests, witnesses to this intimate conversation, remained silent. The scene unfolding before them was no longer just a musical spectacle, but the birth of an unexpected alliance between two very different worlds. Michael took a deep breath. He knew this offer could change his life forever. He now saw a real opportunity to turn his dream into a reality, to step out of the shadows and share his art with the world. Evelyn, smiling, felt she had found more than a musician, she had found someone capable of surprising her, moving her, and defying all expectations. Their bond, born from a simple challenge to entertain guests, had just reached a decisive milestone. That evening at the Harper mansion, Michael Thompson realized his life was about to take a radical turn. The recognition and opportunity he had long hoped for were finally within reach, offered by a woman who had dared to believe in him before anyone else. The following weeks changed Michael Thompson's life dramatically. With Evelyn Harper's support, he gained access to prestigious recording studios, met renowned musicians, and took part in his first public performances in renowned concert halls. Each performance confirmed what the Harper Villa had revealed: Michael was not just a talented musician, he was exceptional. For Michael, the transition was a mixture of wonder and humility. He remained true to himself, humble and reserved, despite the growing admiration of the audience. He knew that his music must never lose its authenticity, the same authenticity that had touched Evelyn and the guests that evening. Evelyn, for her part, watched with pride and tenderness as her protégé blossomed. Their relationship, which began as a simple challenge, had grown into a deep bond based on trust, respect, and complicity. She saw in Michael not only a brilliant artist, but a man whose inner strength rivaled his artistic sensitivity. At their first major public performance, Michael entered the stage to cheers. Evelyn was in the audience, standing among the spectators, her eyes shining with emotion. When he placed his fingers on the piano and the first notes rose, the entire audience was captivated. The man who had been invisible in New York a few weeks earlier was now a rising star in the musical world. After the concert, critics and spectators praised his virtuosity and ability to convey deep emotions. The guests at Harper's Villa weren't the only ones impressed. Michael had won the hearts of the audience, and his name began to circulate in the city's most influential circles. For Evelyn and Michael, this transformation was not only professional, but personal. They had learned to understand, support, and admire one another. The promise of marriage, initially issued as a frivolous challenge, now took on a much deeper meaning. It symbolized recognition, respect, and a true connection between two souls who seemed at odds with each other, but who had been united by passion and sincerity. That evening, as he left the stage, Michael smiled at Evelyn from the wings. In his eyes shone the certainty that their story, born from a simple challenge and a piano, was only just beginning. The marriage between Evelyn Harper and Michael Thompson was announced a few months later, not as a billionaire's whim, but as the meeting of two complementary worlds. The Harper Villa, once the setting for frivolous social gatherings, became the scene of a celebration where simplicity and elegance blended, just like their two lives. Michael, dressed simply but with a natural presence, didn't feel out of place. Evelyn, radiant and sincere, held his hand tenderly. The guests, witnesses to the evening where Michael had first revealed his talent, had been invited to share this symbolic moment. All were impressed by the path taken by the man who once went unnoticed. At the reception, Michael played the piano for the guests. Each note told their story: the unlikely encounter, Evelyn's challenge, the discovery of hidden talent, and the recognition they finally achieved. Music was no longer simply an art, it became the invisible thread that bound their lives together and inspired those who listened to it. Evelyn smiled, watching Michael captivate every glance. She understood that true greatness was measured not in money or social status, but in passion, courage, and authenticity. Michael, for his part, knew that his dream had found fulfillment, not only in music, but in the person who had believed in him before anyone else. Their story quickly became an example to anyone who believed talent should remain hidden or that wealth and social status defined a person's worth. Michael and Evelyn demonstrated that sometimes, all it takes is a bold move and an unlikely encounter to transform lives. And as the piano resonated beneath Michael's fingers, Evelyn, at his side, realized that the symphony of their lives was only just beginning. Together, they would write a melody of love, success, and respect that would resonate far beyond the walls of Harper's Villa. The cleaner-turned-piano prodigy and the eccentric billionaire had found their harmony, proving that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin where you least expect them.